Hello again, everybody, and welcome to the LSU Sports Insider Podcast. Today is Monday, March the 24th. I'm Zach Ewing with Advocate men's basketball beat writer Toyloy TJ Brown, and we are here to kind of wrap up the men's basketball season and look forward to what's ahead for them in the offseason, which is beginning very quickly, TJ. It's transfer portal opens today. We've already seen some action, so lots to get to.
Yeah, no, for sure. I was writing my couple stories from last night to this morning with some transfer portal stuff. So yeah, it's the off season fully.
Yeah, obviously the men's tournament completed its second round yesterday. They're into the Sweet 16, but it's the way college sports works anymore. You have to start planning for the following season before this season is even over for every team. And so the transfer portal opened at 12:01 a.m. Monday morning, and we've already seen 3 LSU players enter it. I'm sure LSU is already talking to many players and made contact with many players they'd like to bring in. And so we're going to talk about what, it's obviously a crucial offseason for Matt McMahon and his staff. They are going to enter next season on the hottest of hot seats. But first, TJ, let's take a quick look back at just how bad things got for LSU this year. I know nobody really wants to necessarily rip that Band-Aid off, but just for perspective's sake, everybody knows LSU was 15th in the SEC. They were 3-15, one of only 2 SEC teams that did not make the NCAA tournament. They declined an NIT bid, even though they were eligible for an automatic NIT bid. And I think a lot of that just has to do with, they were not playing well at the end of the year. They may not have even had a team to field in the NIT with all of these transfers. Like it was getting pretty ugly there at the end.
Yeah, no, it wasn't a fun sight. I was at the SEC tournament in Nashville, and yeah, they did not look like themselves. Not that they were going to beat Mississippi State, but they looked even worse than they had previously after having, they started off a little fiery, and then it just slowly teetered downwards. And yeah, bodies were low. No Corey Chess, no Victorious Miller. That's a lot of bench depth that they have. Both those guys have started at times during the season. But yeah, just to sort of take a little bit, zoom out. The reason why this team was 15th in the SEC and analytically was the worst in the SEC by Ken Palm net rating. They were, I believe, 20 spots or 21 spots below South Carolina when it comes to Ken Palm net rating. Boils down to 3 things in terms of when I sort of evaluated and reflected. The first is just they didn't have the talent, lack of talent. The second reason is that they were inexperienced. They relied on a lot of freshmen. At one point, they played 5 freshmen in one game, like real minutes, not like 2 minutes in garbage time, but 5 freshmen at least 10 minutes in one game and 4 for the majority of the season. The final reason is just they didn't have an identity. They didn't have something that they can hang their hat on that made them a team that opponents felt a little bit nervous about. I guess the biggest thing, the closest thing to an identity was Cam Carter. But one player, and I love Cam Carter, but he didn't make an All-American team or an All-SEC team. So Cam Carter, quality player, is not going to be an identity for a team that's going to have success. Sort of to go into a bit more specifics, though, and I don't want to linger too much because we have a lot to get to, but Jordan Sears was a big part of the I guess lack of talent sort of point I made. He was a 5th-year senior that transferred in from UT Martin. He had a 43% three-point shooting season last year, and this season he shot 31% from 3, shot over 180 attempts, and that was the worst efficiency mark for anyone in the SEC that shot at least 150 threes. So he was the worst three-point shooter out of the high-volume three-point shooters. Curtis Gibbs was their backup point guard. Oh, go ahead. You want to jump in, Zach?
No, I'm listening to you and couldn't shoot, didn't have size, didn't have experience.
Yeah.
There is just not a lot of good things to say here, but keep going.
Yeah. I'll try not to linger too much. I just want to, I guess, touch a little bit in case people just may have zoned out because it makes sense to zone out on this season. Curtis Gibbs was their backup point guard. Point guard, traditionally the most important position. He's a freshman and he shot 26% from the field and shot 118 threes and shot, I believe, 24.6% from three-point land. He was quite literally the worst three-point shooter of any player in the SEC that shot at least 70 three-pointers. And he shot horribly from within the 2-point range, just had freshman mistakes. And last detail in terms of the lack of talent, just Damian Collins, he's someone that had a lot of nice moments here and there. Brightman was very admirable, had the shoulder stuff, continuously dislocated and it came back in games, incredible toughness, but he had the lowest defensive rebounding percentage of any player that really played center. in the SEC. He's a 6'9" center, quote unquote center. He was the worst defensive rebounder, averaged 4 rebounds per game. And if you can't shoot, you can't grab rebounds and misses from your opponent. That's just hard to really make up the difference. And experience wise, straightforward. They relied on Robert Miller, Corey Chess, Victorious Miller, even Trey Green at one point, and Curtis Givens to really produce. And it's just a lot to ask. And all these freshmen, they had moments. Even Trey had his moment, had a nice tomahawk dunk for his first basket against Alabama after a block shot. But they're freshmen that weren't one and dones. They're freshmen that had growing pains. Robert Miller, who had a really good outro or conclusion to the season, he struggled for the first 20 plus games or 15 plus games to even get 2 field goals. Again, he had a great uplifting ending, but if that's one of the freshmen that they initially started in the starting lineup, and you have other freshmen that aren't as talented, to put it simply, it's just going to be hard to really trust and rely on them. The last piece on the identity, the team wanted to be run and gun. They wanted to be fast tempo, shoot 3-pointers, get up and run some actions, and also have Jalen Reed be their hub inside as an interior scorer. And Jalen Reed's injury obviously burst that bubble as far as him being their second best player. But yeah, their identity as a 3-point shooting up-tempo team, it's hard to do that when you're not making shots and you're not grabbing defensive rebounds in order to get on that fast break. And it just felt like whenever they did have a little mojo in stretches, it would be easily like sort of bursted once opponent got an offensive rebound or they forced a turnover. And turnover issues was a big thing for LSU as well. So after they couldn't be a running gun 3-point shooting team, it's just what else do you have to rely on?
Yeah.
And they didn't have anything to rely on. And I guess one piece I wish they leaned into more on defense, but maybe they just didn't have the manpower and the experience of players to really be like a Texas A&M that's really gritty, really defensively focused. It's hard. In SEC, like we have set up throughout the season, the lead conference, 14 teams in the NCAA tournament. It's hard to make up for those flaws when you're having against on a nightly basis play against amazing teams.
Yeah, just totally unforgiving. 14 teams in the NCAA tournament, and we could argue did Texas actually belong and that sort of thing, but 7 of these teams are in the Sweet 16, and that's even without a really good team. A couple top 25 teams like Texas A&M and Missouri didn't even make it. So you really had 9 teams that were like top 25 caliber that you're playing night in and night out. And so, yeah, I mean, I think you laid it out there. Like, again, don't want to spend too much time picking that Band-Aid, but this was a team that looked pretty good in the non-conference. And then once you get into conference play, it just kind of fell apart. In fact, I was looking at KenPom where you can parse by conference only numbers. LSU had the second worst offensive efficiency in the conference, ahead of only South Carolina. They had the second worst conference only defense in the SEC, better than only Vanderbilt. So there was just nothing good to say. I mean, I think the category they rated best in was 2-point offense. Okay, KenPom splits all this. Oh, and also block percentage on defense. Those 2, they were 8th in the SEC. Everything else, they were worse than that. So they were not, 8th is like middle of the pack. They were not better than middle of the pack in any analytic category in SEC play. So that kind of leads us into the next discussion and maybe the bigger picture here, TJ. And that's, Matt McMahon has already been announced. He's coming back for 2025. Obviously, if you were going to make a move, you'd have made it already. So that's been confirmed. Matt McMahon will be LSU's coach in 2025-26. And quite frankly, the question is this the right move? I mean, Matt McMahon, he took over a pretty bleak situation, left the program. He took over the program with some sanctions from Will Wade. I don't believe he had a single player on his roster left over from Will Wade, maybe one. And they were not very competitive his first year. They got a lot better last year, finished 500 in conference, made the NIT. And I don't even know that you needed a lot of progress from that in year 3. If it had even just stagnated and you said, okay, especially in a good conference, this was an NIT type team in year 3 and they were competitive and maybe just didn't quite make it, and you could at least see that line continuing to move up. The fact that they went backward and so far backward is what's concerning, I think, to anyone following this program.
Yeah. Before I answer that question, in the non-conference where they went 11-2, all those teams that they beat, or all the teams that they played, let alone beat, all those teams missed the NCAA tournament. So maybe that non-conference was a little fool's gold, just to go
Yeah.
back to that.
Good.
But yeah, with McMahon, yeah, I've heard a lot of from the fan base. Obviously, they're very displeased with 3 years and not having any progress, and not just not having progress, but this season being sort of a not just like a wash. And I used this in my article, the last couple articles I've written, but they were the doormat of the SEC. Whenever opposing teams came into the arena at the PMAC, they didn't feel nervous, or there wasn't any sort of discomfort that this was going to be a loud house that you had to sort of grind and win. They knew that they were the more talented team, and they more times than not, besides South Carolina, was the only team that they lost to, South Carolina and Arkansas. And back then, Arkansas was not the Arkansas team that we see now in the NCAA tournament. But those are the only two teams that lost at home or at LSU's home. But yeah, as far as to my eye and my analysis and reporting, it's hard to say. And coaching is so hard to evaluate because you're not behind closed doors. You're not able to see exactly what the game plan is. You just see what the product and the result is. And the injuries existed. Tyrell Ward's departure also existed. So LSU was at a deficit when it came to what they had already planned for this team. And those are two juniors, two returning juniors that were going to be starters. Most likely, obviously, Jalen Reed was, but most likely Tyrell Ward would have been a starter as well, or would have been eventually been a starter based off how guys actually performed. Yeah, they had a rough deck of cards, but even with the rough deck or rough hand of cards, excuse me, I think they did underperform. Part of the underperformance is just because of the lack of talent that I laid out. It's hard to get wins over a Texas or a Georgia, two games that we saw as winnable when you have a point guard that's shooting 31% from the field, has having turnover problems. It's hard to, and I'll give him credit for this. McMahon didn't not try to do things differently. By my count, it's hard to count starting lineups, but I think he at least made 8 different starting lineup adjustments during the season. He's changed schematically their entire sort of trying to go 4 guards and 1 big instead of the traditional 3 guards and 2 forwards. He played Trey Green, who again, all of the Trey he's going to be a star on the football team, but most teams aren't playing significant minutes to a 2 sport athlete a month after he is finished playing football.
Yeah.
So he tried every sort of thing that he had in his toolbox, and it just wasn't. It's not enough to make up for the lack of talent. So I think the real evaluation for McMahon is really this offseason. I think I'll have a pretty clear idea of how if McMahon sort of is the guy for the job based off how this offseason goes, because he didn't have the dudes. Part of coaching is obviously the scheme, but another deal, which is probably even more important in the NIL era, is to have the recruiting to get the transfer portal hits, to hit obviously the recruiting trail with the high schoolers. But so far, he's not been a great transfer portal scout. His best transfer portal get, statistically, and I wasn't here yet, but his best transfer portal get came in his first year when he came with some guys from Murray State, and I had some pretty good seasons. Last year, he had a couple good guys, but I wouldn't necessarily they were phenomenal. LSU was middle of the pack last year for a reason. So this year, he has to hit the transfer portal as hard as possible and actually bring in real talented dudes. That's the only way you can survive in a talented conference that's not going to get any weaker.
Yeah, no doubt about that. And we will talk some transfer portal at the end of this episode. I've kind of been on record in our earlier pods, TJ, saying, like, I think you give Matt McMahon another year, and there's a few reasons for that. Like, I think this is the right move, and one of them is just quite simply the economics of college sports these days, with the money needed for NIL, and now the SEC is going to have a pool to pay players directly, with the monster that is football in the SEC, where you just have to compete in that sport to be a healthy athletic program. You have to. And so football needs that big chunk of the pie. And when you start combining all of those things, paying an expensive buyout to Matt McMahon is just not at the top of the priority list. I know that there are LSU basketball fans who want this program to be back what it's been in the past, and even in the recent past. They've got to they just can't fork over that chunk of change right now when it could be better used for NIL, to try to attract some transfers, that sort of thing. And then the other reason, I just am not convinced Matt McMahon is a bad coach. Like you said, he did make some adjustments. He did try some things. He was dealt a bad hand with injuries. and with a superpower of a conference. Did he do a great job this last season? No, I don't. No one's saying that. I mean, LSU obviously in conference play just absolutely it started snowballing on them, and they could not pull themselves out of it. But having said all that, like I think you have to run it back, and that's what LSU's doing, and just give this regime at least one more year. But I mean, I will say this, and tell me if you disagree, but he is going to enter next season on a burning hot seat. Like he's got to show progress next year.
Yeah, no, everyone feels that. I felt that. Other reporters feel that way. Felt that way before it really tumbled into the 6-game losing streak at the end of the season. Yeah, this is do or die, make or break. I think he had one of these type of seasons at Murray State. I believe it was year 2, where he didn't have a great season. And Murray State, obviously not an SEC program, but Murray State's known for basketball there, and doing well in their conference and the OVC. And he had a sub 500 conference, which is the first time they've done that in I don't know how many years. And there was a little hot seat there, and he was able to pull it off, and they made it to the NCAA tournament. And he also made the NCAA tournament at Murray State without John Morant, who people know him best for coaching. I think McMahon knows his stuff. I think he really works hard in terms of building game plans and scouting and studying. Just that he needs to prove that he can get the guys. And now that he's confirmed to be the coach for next season, as well as we reported that NIL funding will be improved for him to get dudes, this is really where it's going to be decided. Not fully, because obviously injuries can still happen and things can happen in the SEC that we just can't foresee. But he has to get dudes this transfer portal season. It's of the utmost importance, because you can't have another year like this where it's sort of looked down the roster and dudes are underperforming or just aren't as good as what people in that program assume that they would be. And that also comes in retention as well. There's a couple of freshmen that will be sophomores that I think have a good potential to be good, and we'll see if he can keep them or if they choose to leave.
Yeah, it's a good point to look back at some of his Murray State resume, because he did have a couple of rough years. I mean, they started out his first year there, they were 17 and 14. Second year, 16 and 17. That's what you're talking about. 8 and 8 in the conference. Not a very good team. And then they kind of exploded. And part of that was John Morant. But they went 26 and 6, 16 and 2 in the conference, and made the NCAA tournament. Next year, 28 and 5, 16 and 2 in the conference, won a game in the NCAA tournament. Next year, 23 and 9, 15 and 3 in conference, didn't quite make it. They lost in the conference tournament. Then they slip in 2021 to 13 and 13, and you kind of think, okay, well, can he pull it back out? And he did. They went 31 and 3, probably had their best year in 2022. This is what got him hired at LSU. They were 18 and 0 in the Ohio Valley Conference. They were a number 7 seed in the tournament. They made it to the second round again, and this guy can coach. Okay, he's now, to your point, can he get the pieces to compete in the SEC? But I wouldn't be too concerned, because he's shown, there's been down years in his past, and he's bounced back fairly quickly from those.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, 100%. Yeah, I agree. Thanks for looking that up and getting the exact records. Yeah, the thing that I'm just gonna keep, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but the SEC is not getting any weaker, or most likely it's not going to get much weaker if it drops down a little bit while the ACC gets better, which they had a horrible season for their standards. So he's going to compete for transfer portal gets with the Kentuckys, with the Alabamas, with the Auburns that when they lose Janai Broome, with the other teams that are powerhouse, with the Floridas, they're going to have at least 2 guys leave. Walter Clayton most likely going to be an NBA draft pick. So he's going to be competing with other powerhouses to get players that are going to be the stars of their rivals. And it's going to be really hard. He has to be smart, as well as just somehow have a great pitch along with the finances to get these dudes, instead of going to a more established, winning, successful program like in Alabama under Nate Oates, who's been a pretty prolific transfer portal getter. I don't want to make it too severe, but really this offseason is going to decide if this LSU team will be at least competing and make the NCAA tournament, which might be the bar that he has to reach, because I don't know 4 straight years of missing the NCAA tournament is going to be good enough to save John. And I understand the buyout stuff, and I need to do my due diligence, see sort of the football and comparative finances of all the things. But it'll be a really burning hot seat if we're in the same place next year at this time, and they miss the NCAA tournament after sort of the NIL funding came to them. So yeah, it's going to be a rough offseason in terms of pressure.
Yeah, I mean, look, we can sit and talk about going into next season what the expectation is, but I think it's the NCAA tournament. I mean,
Mhm.
in this day and age in college athletics, patience only lasts so long. And you can look at what Matt McMahon did at Murray State and say, okay, well, he's going to get it right eventually. That's this year. This has got to be eventually. If that doesn't happen, then yeah. I mean, and TJ, we're going to talk transfer portal to end the show, and we need to take a short break first. But I did want to mention one more thing, and that's the backdrop of what is happening at LSU under Matt McMahon. And this, I think, makes his seat even hotter. And that is the story of Will Wade.
Yeah.
And of course, we saw this past weekend, the closest LSU men got to the NCAA tournament was watching Will Wade lead McNeese State to an upset win over Clemson on Thursday. Now they lost to Purdue on Saturday; they're out. But Will Wade was hired. It was the news broke of him being hired in between Selection Sunday and that first round game. It wasn't officially announced until McNeese State's season was over, but he was, he's on his way to NC State. So Will Wade is back in a power conference, and you hear this all the time on social media from fans in person. It's just all you hear is, well, what Will Wade got in trouble for at LSU was paying players. Paying players is now legal.
Yeah.
So why wouldn't you want Will Wade running your program? There are a couple of rebuttals to that. I mean, number one is he didn't follow the rules at the time. And if you don't follow the rules at the time, you're cheating at the time. I mean, those are the facts. Okay. Just because the rules have since changed does not mean that it was okay for him to break them back then. That's number one. And then number two, as far as like him returning to LSU, that door has always been closed. I don't think Scott Woodward, the guy who fired him, is going to go back to him. I don't think Will Wade probably wants to come back to the place that let him go kind of unceremoniously. But it is true that as he's going back into the ACC and back into power conference basketball, like it's hard not to think about what was and what still could be for LSU.
Yeah, no, 100%. I know a lot of Will Wade truthers. I wasn't here during the Will Wade era, but I obviously know about him as a college basketball fan. Yeah, a lot of love for Will Wade still within the LSU fan base as far as just knowing what he's doing. And he made history at McNeese State. He brought him, I believe, to their first back-to-back NCAA tournament appearances as well as their first NCAA tournament win. So having that sort of history done by your former coach at a much smaller school that doesn't have nearly the same resources, different obviously pool that they're playing in. They're playing in the Southland Conference. That's very different than SEC. But still, he's had success in a place that's not easy to be successful at. And yeah, it's hard to not be a little jealous if you're an LSU fan watching that. Yeah, Will Wade's he's proven to be a great schematic coach, beating Clemson in the first round, held them 13 points in the first half, which is unreal. You can get a coaching job just off that type of performance. That's all coaching as far as having an undersized team be able to do that to an ACC school that was really good this season, even though the ACC was a little bit weaker. But he's also proven to be able to get dudes, and that's part of what he got dudes at that point, breaking the rules. But no, those are not rules anymore. You can pay players, and that's a big part of coaching. So he's sort of already well trained in that. And yeah, I don't expect anything but success whenever he gets to NC State. And it may not be year one, but who knows? It could be year one if he hits the transfer portal, gets a couple of his McNeese players. I think he's bringing that manager, Khan, with him on the journey. So maybe the vibes will be pretty good. And who knows? NC State might be in the mix.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to follow Will Wade. I don't want to say it'll be fun because I think it's salt in the wound for LSU fans that he's not here. I mean, the guy won an SEC championship, and that wasn't the same SEC at that time, but he did a hell of a job here on the court. Now, again, Scott Woodward wants to run his program in a certain way, and he chose not to do it that way, and he knew that there were sanctions coming, and that was probably the best move for LSU. So I get that there's like this FOMO with Will Wade, but man, I just think as an LSU fan, it's high time to turn the page from that. That was 3 years ago now, and we got to focus on what Matt McMahon is going to do to either save his job or to end his tenure here and start a new chapter for LSU men's basketball. So that is going to begin. Well, it already has begun at 12:01 this morning when the transfer portal opened. So let's take a quick break here. We'll be back in 30 seconds. We're going to give you the news of the day as far as who is transferred out for LSU. and maybe what they will target in the transfer portal with TJ Brown here on the LSU Sports Insider right after this.
There's no better place to parlay than Caesars Sportsbook. With quick picks, you can tap right into pre-built ready-to-bet parlays right from the home screen. And if you miss tip-off, no worries. You can play same-game parlays live during the action. Plus, it's never been easier to find and bet on the biggest matchups of the day, so you can keep up with all the action. Caesars Sportsbook, proud partner of the NBA and the only sportsbook app with Caesars Rewards. Download it today.
Okay, welcome back to the LSU Sports Insider. Want to encourage you to subscribe to our LSU Sports at NOLA.com YouTube channel. And you can also find us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Like, comment, subscribe. The comments help more than you know. It helps to grow our channel. So go ahead, even if you think that we're stupid, go ahead and say something. We're okay with that. And we also appreciate the likes and, of course, subscribe, sign up for notifications, all of that good stuff. Lots of stuff going on at LSU. We will have a post-game show from the LSU women's game tonight at the PMAC against Florida State for the right to go to the Sweet 16. Also, of course, baseball loses its series in Austin this weekend, but still top 10 in the country. Will continue to follow the baseball team, the softball team, gymnastics team won another SEC title, so congratulations to them. And then TJ, you have men's basketball, which is just can't quite seem to figure it out. They will try to figure it out, and they will try to do so without Corey Chest, without Tyrell Ward, and then who was the third transfer you said?
Mike Williams III.
Mike Williams III. I'm sorry. Yeah, all three of those guys have announced that they are entering the transfer portal. Of course, there were some injury problems for those guys this year, and honestly, I don't know how many roster spots are even secure on this team. Like, it may be almost a complete overhaul.
Yeah, I don't have the math right in front of me, but they have 4 seniors to my memory that are going to be gone. Jai Bailey, Sears, Cam Carter, and Derek Fountain. And then they have, obviously, these 3 departures. So that's already 7 with Chess, Ward, Williams in the transfer portal. And we'll see if anything else happens. But yeah, all 3 of these players were kind of expected. Ward stepped away due to mental health reasons. He maybe just needs a new change of scenery. He's from the DC area, so maybe he goes closer to home. Or I know he's in the East Coast area, so maybe he gets closer up north. Chest, he was someone that had really bright moments. Arguably, at points was the second best player, depending on the game. But he did have a lot of erraticness to his game. Freak athlete, 6'8" forward, redshirt freshman. Sat out his true freshman year. Came back and earned his minutes, earned a starting lineup spot. I believe made 19 starts. Just was a little erratic on defense and offense. Got in foul trouble. He was a big part of the turnover problems as well. What else he had? So he lost sort of his place in the rotation. He also had injuries. He had a back and a foot issue this season. So not too surprising with his departure. Go ahead, Zach.
Yeah, I was just going to say, you talk about these guys leaving, and Cam Carter's a senior, Jordan Sears is a senior. Like, who do they even want back on this team, TJ? Like, I think Miller is probably atop that list, but who else do they want to have back?
Yeah, there are definitely guys. So number 1 on the list, and I love Victorious. It's not a distant number 1, but number 1 is Robert Miller. Robert Miller is the top guy that they not just want to, but kind of need to retain, because he has a little bit of lineage to LSU. His dad went to LSU, played football here. He's from the Texas area, so not too, I think Houston, Texas to be exact, not super far. But most importantly, he was good. He had a really rough start to a season. I believe he started the first 5 games in a year, and the first 15 games or so, he didn't make 2 field goals in 1 game, like really rough at points. And then he just flipped a switch and realized and adjusted to the physicality of the SEC, of college basketball, and used his God-given 6'10" height and 7'4", 7'5" wingspan. And he was an impactful defender and scorer. He had a 19-point game, I believe, against Florida. He had a 14-point game, 14 or 16 points in the finale in the SEC tournament, and was only like 6 for 8 from the field. So Robert Miller, he grew at a pretty exponential pace at the end of the year, and as a sophomore, gets a little bit stronger, gets even more wise in terms of his basketball feel. He's going to be like a good player, I'm pretty sure, as a sophomore. And if you pair him with Jalen Reed, that's kind of scary. Victorious Miller is the second dude they want to keep. Victorious Miller, he also had a promising freshman year. He had a bit more rough stretches towards SEC play. Then he had a couple of ankle injuries. The last one was pretty nasty. so I wasn't surprised that he missed the last few games of the year. But he's a 6'5" shooting guard. I know he wants to play a little bit of point, so maybe you can run some ball screen stuff with him as a lead flip steals hitter. But he's a really skilled mid-range scorer. He has a 3-point stroke that didn't go down as much as they would have wanted. I think with just more experience, he knows what to expect now. He should be another productive sophomore. So those are the two guys for sure. One, I'll see Jalen Reed. He'll be, assuming that if he does redshirt, because he might be able to redshirt because he only played 8 games this past season. He'll be a redshirt junior, and that'll be someone that they would want to have on the roster. He's part of McMahon's first recruiting class. I think he's literally the first recruit McMahon had commit to the program during his first recruiting trail. So yeah, Jalen Reed. He also had a good season before before he got hurt in the 8th game against Florida State. He was doing really well, and LSU probably would have won a couple more games with him. They probably beat a Vanderbilt because they had Vanderbilt on the ropes a little bit, but couldn't get rebounds. And maybe one other game that might have been close. So those are the 3 main pieces that they want to keep. Curtis Givens is the person I didn't really mention. If he's your backup point guard, you'd hope that he makes significant progress, because if he makes a little bit of progress, that still would be subpar for your second point guard. So that's a little up in the air. Maybe he just needs to go. I don't want to say he may need to go down a level, because he still is a talented player. He was top 80 recruit for a reason. He just was significantly bad, and it just would have never got it going. So it may not be as high on the priority list for LSU to keep him, instead of just get a better transfer, as well as make room for their incoming high schooler that's a freshman named Jalen Reese, who's a signee who actually made the Jordan Brand Classic, which is a high school all-star game. So the main 3 pieces: Victorious, Robert Miller, and Jalen Reed. Maybe Damian Collins as well might be someone that they want to keep, but he didn't have the greatest season.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned Jalen Reese and the incoming freshman, because it is a top 20 class. I think they're number 18 last I looked in the country. It's Jalen Reese, Mozzie Mosley, and Matt Gillipool. I think I'm saying that right, but he's the big man of the class. So there are some talented players coming in. Those guys are, I think, all 4-star players. None of them maybe are instant impact, but maybe you get something from there. And then you have those building blocks that you mentioned: Robert Woods, Victorious Miller, maybe Jalen Reed. So everybody else, if it's not nailed to the floor and you can upgrade, and this goes, I mean, like Damian Collins, this is the day and age of college basketball. You can't sit there and say, there's some potential there. Maybe we hang around. Like, you've got to upgrade. You've got to upgrade. And that's where this transfer portal is going to come in. And so with that said, TJ, and it's a little bit early for specific names maybe, but what positions and what connections do you hope Matt McMahon is using to try to fill those positions?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And I can give you one name. I'm not this kind of a hot name that I was surprised to see, but it makes sense because this kid had a really epic season. There's a kid named Trayson Eaglestaff. It was reported by 24/7 Sports that this player from North Dakota State, Trayson Eaglestaff, he has like 20 schools on his list of teams that have contacted him, but LSU is one of those schools that have reached out as far as looking for him to transfer. And he's a shooting guard, 6'6" guard that shot 36% from 3, which doesn't sound incredible high. It's good, but not incredibly high. But he shot 7 attempts, averaged 18, 19 points per game, and had 2 games that put him on the map. One was a 51-point game against a rival in South Dakota State. Another one was a 40-point game against Alabama. Alabama's not a tremendous defensive team, but that still is an Alabama team that has dudes that will intimidate like a mid-major player that wouldn't score 40 points on them. But point is, if LSU is on looking at players like that, that's a really good sign. If that's coming through the woodworks, potentially someone of that caliber who's maybe coming from mid-major, but has some bona fides to be someone that could be a legit star or secondary star. But as far as positional things I need, number one is a point guard. You definitely need a point guard. I love Jalen Reese from the clips I've seen, but I don't want to put all the onus on him as a freshman that's also 6 feet tall. Just want to ease him gracefully or slowly. Don't give him the Curtis Givens sort of, you have to start 12 games, play 20-plus minutes. Because
throw it into the fire, buddy.
Yeah, so we don't want to throw freshmen in the fire unless they can handle it. And that probably wouldn't happen during SEC play or wouldn't go well unless he's tremendous beyond belief. So yeah, point guard is number one. Just need someone not only that can run the show, but just steady. Because Jordan Sears not only didn't shoot poorly, or did he shoot poorly, he also was too mistake prone. He would have some games he had a good game against Alabama, but he would have too many games against other SEC opponents where he would just careless fouls, 2 fouls in 5 minutes, turnovers, miscommunication, wrong decisions of driving. It's hard to survive as a 5'11" guard. Like, only Mark Sears is the only really successful 5'11" point guard in the SEC, and that's not an accident. And he's been in the SEC for 2 years, so it's not. He has like games on games on games.
Yeah, before you continue, TJ, I'm just going to interject. Trayson Eaglestaff, for those who maybe don't remember, he scored 40 points on Alabama back in December. He scored 51 against South Dakota State. I mean, this is a prolific scorer now, and we'll talk about this in a second. LSU's got like 20 other schools to fight off for this kid, so we're gonna have to figure out how they get them. But keep going with your position breakdown. I just saw that about Eaglestaff and wanted to throw that in.
Yeah. But that's good. It's a good sign that they're looking at guys of that high, like that are being heavily touted. If they're looking at dudes that are all mid majors, that's probably not a good. Not he's also a mid major, but looking at mid majors that aren't sort of making buzz or didn't have a lot of buzz, that would be sort of a bad sign that they're sort of not even reaching for that heights. But yeah, point guard's number one. Second is a big man that can get rebounds. I love Robert Miller and Jalen Reed, but just needs some more steady rim glass cleaning. They were 300 something in the country in defensive rebounds this year. Is really bad. They gave up like 8 offensive rebounds in the first possession against Auburn, and I'm not exact, like 7 or 8. I have the clip on Twitter. So yeah, rebounding was really, really bad. So they need a big man that can do that, clean the glass. Maybe a big man that can also do a little something on the perimeter. Doesn't have to be a lights out shooter, but just be respectable. I love Davian Collins, but he was a sub 25% 3-point shooter this year. Corey Chess had 0 3-point shooting. Derek Fountain also 0 3-point shooter, even though he tried to make a couple here and there. So maybe a big man that can space a little bit, that would be helpful. But yeah, overall, the third piece or third thing is just more just wing talent. Cam Carter was awesome. Cam Carter still had a great year for the situation that he was put in, shooting 39% from 3. And what else you had when everyone was just targeting him on defense from the opposing side. It's really impressive. Like, he had a hard job to do, and he sometimes fell short of it because it just was really hard burden to have as the star player. Found a lot of help. So just more perimeter wing talent, somewhere in the 6'5" range. Hopefully, they started 3 guys that were sub 6'5" and under. So hopefully, having a 6'5", 6'6" person to complement maybe a shorter guard if they get another guard that's a smaller size. So yeah, they just need more perimeter talent. I can't really exaggerate. The team, there was so many moments where LSU would have some things go in their favor and just unfortunately just would get the shot clanked or just maybe some size disadvantage made it harder for Curtis Gibbons, who's 6'3", to get downhill, and he's also a freshman, so that was a part of the issue. But Victorious Miller, who's 6'5", but he's 185 pounds. So just someone that has real size, real experience, that can score when asked, and not go on too many cold droughts or cold spells, because that was a big pattern. So just to recap: point guard, big man that can rebound, and another wing scorer, a couple wing scorers that are respectable, like scorers and making their own shot, and also just making catch and shoot shots.
Yeah, and I mean, like, look, yes, they need those positions. They just need talent, man. They just need dudes. Like that. That's what they're missing. And so you'd take them at any, like I said, outside of those couple of key guys, you're the 2 Millers really. You absolutely need anything that's not bolted to the floor can be upgraded. And I think Matt McMahon, if he realizes the urgency, is going to go do it. Now, to wrap things up, and this is where I was getting with Trayson Eaglestaff, is like, you got to beat off 20 schools for this kid. Like Kentucky, Michigan, Kansas, Alabama, Gonzaga, UCLA, like just go down the list here. It's ridiculous. This Villanova, Oklahoma, St. John's, like some of these schools that have also been interested in Trayson Eaglestaff. How do you convince, and not necessarily him, but any kid who's talented and will upgrade this roster is going to be in demand? So we talked about LSU's increased NIL funds for this, but if you look at their results last year, like, they're not the only school with NIL funds to spend on basketball. Certainly, some of those Villanova, Kansas, like, that's what they do is basketball. How do you convince these kids to come to Baton Rouge over some of those other options?
Yeah, South Carolina also a school that reports about their NIL going up because they had a bad season, and they're losing their NBA draft pick and Colin Murray Boyles, who's going to be a first-round pick this year. But yeah, the way LSU can convince them, it's hard. It's not a great argument besides money, but really besides money and maybe a promise of a premier role. If a kid like Eagle Staff goes to Kentucky, maybe he'll just be a secondary player or tertiary player because Kentucky has a couple 5-stars coming in, and maybe they highlight those or a different sort of transfer get that's a bit better than Eagle Staff, or just has a different role. It's gonna be hard, and I think LSU will have to get someone that's underrated. They'll have to maybe they hoped it was Jordan Sears last year, but it didn't pan out. So they'll have to get someone that has a little less buzz. I saw someone, I guess, on another 24/7 report about a kid from Prairie View A&M, a 6'2" guard that averaged like 16 points. I saw a UNLV player that was like a 6'7" wing that averaged like 14 points. So they might have to go a little bit down a rung in terms of players that have buzz in order to just sort of hopefully beat the market and just find someone that is better than other people realize. But as far as the argument, it's a tough argument. McMahon is very diligent. He's very serious. Part of his pitch when it came to Cam Carter, besides coming home, was to go get the development. And Cam Carter had his best season of his career. Cam Carter went from, I believe, 14 points to 16 points, went from a 33% three-point shooter to a 39%, really a 40% three-point shooter. He had a really tough last two stretches. And that was there was two guys that were injured on top of Jalen Reed. So it's just even less depth and less room for him to work on. So yeah, McMahon will make the pitch of, I'm gonna develop you, I'm gonna help you. If you have every aspiration, which all these kids do, I'm gonna help you get the best chance to make the NBA. And look at what I did with John Morant. Look at what I did with some of these Murray State guys who are not NBA players in terms of guys that you know, but are in the G League or are teetering on getting an NBA contract or have a 10-day. A couple guys from last year's LSU team is in the G League right now. So he has dudes that are on the doorstep or have been in the NBA. So that'll be another part of the pitch that McMahon will do. But yeah, it's going to come down to money. It's not the prettiest thing to sort of boil things down to, but money will be a big part of what gets players to pick LSU over Kentucky or an Auburn or other schools that have more, even like you said, a Villanova that has a tradition over those schools. It's really going to be a lot of the finances and just does a kid want to be in the South or be in Baton Rouge? So yeah, that's sort of what I imagine is the pitch.
It will not be easy. Nothing around the LSU men's basketball program has been in the last year or three. And certainly Matt McMahon has his work cut out for him. It's also going to be that dance where, okay, this is the NIL budget. Do we want to go all in on one player I think can really make a difference? Or do we need to upgrade 3 or 4 spots? And that's where I've got to go with this money. I mean, that's what Matt McMahon and his staff have to decide. So we will follow it every step of the way. You can follow TJ's work at LSU, at theadvocate.com/LSU. And we'll be back on this podcast channel, the LSU Tigers at NOLA.com podcast channel on YouTube. So tune in. Got a lot going on. Like I said, we'll have a women's basketball post-game show live from the PMAC tonight. TJ, you might go ahead and join that. I don't know what all the deadlines and things are going on, but between you and Reed Darcy and Scott Rabelais, we will have a post-game show. I'll be there as well, and excited for that. Also talking baseball, gymnastics, softball, spring football. Going to have an update this week, so keep it locked to the LSU Sports at NOLA.com YouTube channel and the LSU Sports Insider podcast. For TJ Brown, our men's basketball beat writer, I'm Zach Ewing, and this has been the LSU Sports Insider.